This is Dr. Martin's Supplemental Lecture Part 2 on Chapter 19. Right now I'm going to cover Section 4, which is on a group of plants called Gymnosperms. This group includes the conifers, pine trees, spruce, etc. And I want to first list some important features of the gymnosperms, and then we're going to take a look at the life cycle. So these are actually adaptations that this group has compared to the lower groups, which would be the ferns and then the mosses. Number one, the sporophyte is the dominant part of form of the life cycle. So the pine tree that you are seeing, it represents the sporophyte, so the diploid generation. The gametophyte is reduced to just a few cells. Another adaptation is that this group is the first to produce seeds. And a seed, by definition, includes the plant embryo, a food supply, and a protective coating or coat. So these allow the young plant embryo to survive on the ground for a period of time until a suitable environment allows it to germinate. One other adaptation that's seen in this group is the development of pollen. And pollen grains are very light. They can be carried by the wind very easily, and they include the sperm. So we've circumvented the need for water as a dispersing agent. Instead, we have very light structures called pollen that can be moved to the female part of the plant just by wind, or in higher plants by animals. Okay, I'm going to turn now to the life cycle of the gymnosperm, and this is in your textbook, figure 19-13. Okay, so we're going to start with the sporophyte, which again is the pine tree or the spruce tree, juniper, whatever that you're familiar with, that you see all around us. And these plants actually produce what are called cones at the tips of many of the branches. And there's two types of cones. The type of cone that you're familiar with is actually the female, cone. But in addition, there are male cones that are smaller, look a little bit different, that are going to be important in producing the pollen. In fact, if you look on page 431, there's a good photo of male cones. Within each of those structures, we're going to see meiosis taking place, and after meiosis, we'll produce spores that are haploid. So here we've got meiosis here, meiosis here. Let's follow the female first. This is a female cone. The seeds are actually located on the bracts of the cone. There's usually 2 seeds per bract. And from each ovule or each egg cell, well, it's not called an egg cell at this point, these cells will go through meiosis and produce 4 spores. 3 of those will actually die, and 1 is left. And that cell then will divide and give rise to what is actually the female gametophyte. It's actually enclosed within the bracts of the cone that hang on the sporophyte tree. So this is a cross section of the bract, and right here what we have is the female gametophyte. If we look back at the male cones, these are structures that produce spores, so there's sacs of spores within each of these cones. The spores, again, were formed by meiosis, so in this case they're actually, we call them pollen grains, and it represents the male gametophyte. Within the pollen grains are a couple cells that will give rise ultimately to the sperm. Okay, so the pollen grains can be carried by the wind to the female gametophyte, to the eggs, and the sperm can enter, one sperm can enter to fertilize an egg. So here we've got fertilization, and now we have a zygote. So that's going to divide by mitosis to produce a structure that we call the plant embryo, very small, and it's going to be surrounded by a food source, and in addition it's going to be surrounded by protective coating. So this is essentially the seed. This will land on the ground or be carried on the ground by squirrels and so on. And this seed, when it finds an appropriate environment, it will germinate and will produce the young sporophyte. So here's our baby pine tree, which over time will give rise to the adult. So the this group, again, which are the Gymnosperms, we now have a dominant sporophyte. So think back to the mosses, where the green leafy material that you see on the ground, that's really the gametophyte. And those little brown stalks with the little capsules on the top, those are the sporophytes. So here we've turned the tables. Now the dominant plant is the diploid, or the sporophyte. Okay, one last thing about the gymnosperms. There are a number of groups. There's 4 main groups that are part of the gymnosperms. So 4. have the conifers. There's a group that some of you might be familiar with. They're called cycads. These are sold as houseplants. Okay, a third are the ginkgos, which we have sometimes around. And the fourth group is actually not one that you're familiar with, so these are the Neophytes. Phyta. Okay, that's the end of the second lecture, supplemental lecture on chapter 19.